Hello, listeners. Thank you for clicking on this episode of the DIVEBOMB IndyCar Podcast. Now, as a little disclaimer, myself and Archie recorded this episode on Sunday evening. We've since had the confirmation that Mick Schumacher will join Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing for the 2026 IndyCar season, driving the number 47 entry as a nod to the number he's used throughout his entire career thus far. Now, we mentioned Schumacher a couple of times in this episode before he was confirmed, so if it does sound slightly confusing, that's because we didn't have the news officially through yet that he will be an RLL driver for 2026. We will react to that news at some point in the future, potentially as soon as next. Stay tuned for our full thoughts on that episode, but we didn't think it was worth re-recording this episode just for that news. The rest of the episode is certainly worth a listen. We recap plenty of other news, but the Mick Schumacher news, just to reiterate, was confirmed after we record this episode. The rest of the episode is certainly worth a listen. Thank you once again for clicking on the episode, and we hope you enjoy. Welcome back, DIVEBOMB IndyCar Podcast, and we're heading into a very bizarre week, Archie, because it's just us two. Can you remember the last time it was just us two on the podcast? I mean, imagine saying that a couple of months ago, that there'd be an episode of just us two, but there is.
I'm not sure we've actually had one solely us two since the season. Like, I think the last time we have actually been in conversation has been, I guess it was the episode where we discussed Mick Schumacher's test and Rinus VeeKay signing for Hunter-Reay.
Wow.
And that was also with Lockie Hughes being interviewed.
So the last episode I can find where it was just us two, nobody else had looked for the episode, was on October the 2nd, which is almost 2 months ago now, which is pretty crazy. So
what was that? Is it a quiz?
That was our quiz. That was our end of year. That's where we did Tenables and Connections.
Cool.
But since, just to give you a little bit of roundup, for the last about 5 weeks or 6 weeks that we've missed, we had a good friend on James Scott to react to our 2025 predictions. That was a really fun episode. That was a good laugh reacting on what we said all the way back in February, maybe. Then we had Indy Next driver Lockie Hughes on to reflect on his main IndyCar test as well as his Indy Next season. He's going to be one of the championship favourites heading into 2026. And as Archie mentioned at the end of that episode, we mentioned a bit about Mick Schumacher and Rinus VeeKay, some of the latest IndyCar news then. But since then, we haven't updated you, which is what we're going to do today. Following Lockie Hughes, we had a very good friend on, Louis Foster. That was one of the best interviews I think we ever had. That was a very good laugh. Louis was great as always. A very casual podcast, as it always is, with Louis Foster. The week afterwards, we had Will Buxton on once again for the third time this year to reflect on Fox's 2025 season and his first covering IndyCar. And I think we must say congratulations to Will and family, because he was mentioning that his wife is heavily pregnant. She's since given birth. So congratulations, Will and family, because I know that's a big topic. Yes, very big topic. I don't know if he's got any non-alcoholic red wine suggestions yet, so if you have any, send them over to Will. I'm sure he'll be very grateful. We were then followed by a bonus, which was Indy Next Andretti driver Seb Murray, another British folk. That was the third week in a row we had a British folk on the show, so good to have him on for the first time, just to reflect on his 2025 and look forward to 2026. He topped quite an important postseason test at Indianapolis as well, so it's good to reflect with him on that. Then we had Townsend Bell on the show, Will Buxton's colleague, to reflect on Fox's first year. And as always is with Townsend, some quite interesting insights, some great stories in there as well. So I think that's definitely worth a listen, only about half an hour long. We then went over to one of the biggest names ever had on the show, Christian Lundgaard of Aaron McLaren, speaking about his first year with the team, his broken heating, his ex-living partners. A fantastic interview there with Lundgaard, loads of little nuggets of great interest. And then we had on Dennis Hauger recently for the third time this season, but on the first time, to reflect on his move to Dale Coyne Racing. He's back home in Norway, but still gives some great insights into the season. And of course, he has his all-important music choices finally after being confirmed as an IndyCar driver. And it won't stop there, because we're going to have another episode midweek for another Indy Next driver. So stay tuned for that. It doesn't stop. That's something about like 8 or 9 interviews in a month and a half. So hopefully you've enjoyed them all. I know we certainly have. We've had some really, really awesome episodes in there. The driver playlist is now getting very long if you want to give it a listen to it. I think it's got 32 songs now. Exactly, 32 songs. So 16 different drivers have now been on the show at some point who've raced in IndyCar. So some great episodes there. Obviously, we'll get into this one a little bit, but please catch up on all of them, because they are some absolutely awesome interviews in there. I'm sure you've listened to most of them already, but I mean, all of them are definitely worth your time at some point. Anyway, let's breathe. It's just us two.
It's been a hell of a run. I mean, it is very strange to just be here us two. It's like throwback to in season again, isn't it? It's a far cry from our first off season of the podcast, where it was just off seasoning probably about part 8 by this point. It's been relentless. It's been like almost as busy as we've been in season, but not complaining. It's been good to have a content stream to keep IndyCar in everyone's consciousness a little bit, and kind of keep in touch with a lot of the drivers, what they're getting up to, tell their stories. I know we've had a lot of writing going out on the site as well. I've been writing quite a lot of features. Dan, you've founded IndyCar Weekly, a weekly news roundup, which has been doing well, and it's getting increasingly difficult. But yeah, it's been a fun period, and it's nice to actually get to discuss some of that news here. As much as obviously we love having the interviews, but yeah, round up everything that's happened in the last 5 weeks or so.
I've got news for you. In 2023, we're only on part 4 by November the 23rd. Our episode was our 2023 trivia challenge.
Well, just give me some poetic license.
Yeah, quite possibly so. And yeah, busy week. Pieces are steadily going out. We don't obviously have loads going on just because there isn't a lot going on at this point in the season. But as Archie said, I have founded IndyCar Weekly, which, to give you a little bit of a summary, I just try and recap all the small pieces of news each week in IndyCar, however small it may be, and try and get them all in one place so you can read them if necessary. There is a lot of rubbish, and by this week we are sort of plummeting the depths of the barrel to try and find IndyCar news, but there is still some. There was actually quite a bit of news still this week. So a lot of news to catch up on. We'll start off with sort of the most significant and work our way down again. There's a lot being a month and a half of IndyCar news, but we will try and catch up the best we can. And the most significant one is we have another driver confirmed for 2025, which is Caio Collet, who will step up from Indy next to race in the number 4 AJ Foyt Racing entry alongside Santino Ferrucci. He obviously replaces David Malukas, who departed to Team Penske instead of Will Power. Now, Collet finished runner-up to Dennis Hauger in the championship. Hauger was pretty dominant, but Collet sort of gave him a run for his money close to the end of the season. And he obviously brings quite a little bit of backing from Brazil, which we will see adorned on the side of his car throughout the 2026 season. So another seat confirmed for next year. We're only going to be down to 2 or 3 TBC after that. Well, not after this, it's already been confirmed. We're down to 2 or 3 TBC, but one of the big remaining seats fulfilled. Obviously, Collet had done quite a few tests with the team already. He'd already tested at Indianapolis, Mid-Ohio, and at Nashville prior to his announcement. So this one we kind of expected was going to happen based on those tests and Collet's performance in Indy next. But good to have that confirmation heading into next season.
Yeah, I think it felt pretty inevitable. I guess really since he tested for the second time with the team. But yeah, by all accounts, I think he really impressed in those couple of tests that he did. I think he actually was announced on the day of the Nashville test, if I recall correctly. But yeah, it's been a very solid couple of years in Indy Next, I would say. I'd say it's not always been exceptional. It's been very good at times. It's always been very solid. He's been very consistent. He had a very strong rookie season in 24, and ultimately in the 2 years just fell short to the dominance of Foster and then Hauger. But really he led HMD for these 2 seasons, and obviously a lot of cars, that HMD team, and he was the one who really stood out. I think as last season, or whether you want to call it last season or this season, the 2025 season, as that progressed, I think he increasingly took the fight to Hauger. I think as a team, HMD kind of brought it a bit more to Andretti, and I think Collet's shown himself to be quite a well-rounded driver. I think he's very much improved on the oval front over the couple of seasons. And yeah, as you say, Danny, he crucially brings a full season partner to Foyt while also being a super talented driver. And yeah, they needed that backing with Malukas obviously gone and with Penske having funded his seat. It was interesting actually in a recent press conference that Larry Foyt said that he thinks that the Penske link is staying. It was weirdly uncertain. I just thought it was a set in stone thing.
Jonathan Duguid was also asked about this. He didn't really confirm it either, but I believe there's an expectation it will happen.
Yeah, it's weirdly non-committal. I assumed it was just a thing that was going to be continuing. Because I don't think it was ever intended as a thing just for Malukas, or maybe it was. But yeah, that media call was off the back of Homes for Troops, the livery that Ferrucci often runs in the 500 being announced as a full season thing. So it's quite important that the team has that kind of financial stability in terms of partners across both cars. And yeah, can see Collet being a pretty solid IndyCar driver. He's a very level-headed. He's always struck me as pretty unflappable. And yeah, I think he should do pretty well.
Yeah, and obviously Collet took 3 victories and 9 podiums this year. Didn't start the season particularly well in Indy Next, but sort of caught up as it went along, but it's too little too late in regards to a title charge. Good to see the Brazilian flag back in IndyCar. I mean, it's kind of culture to have, your Castroneves and Canards and DeFerrins, a very traditional IndyCar country. Obviously, Pietro Fitipaldi was the most recent driver, but Collet will obviously be back full time. And another driver who we've seen come over from the European side, I'm sure most of you know, but Collet raced in F3, similar time to Marcus Armstrong, Christian Leclerc. Maybe started later than those people. Same time as Dennis Hauger as well, actually, and obviously made the move over at the beginning of last year after not going to Formula 2. And I kind of think we all kind of expected it heading into the season. Collet impressed pretty strongly last year. Didn't quite have the outright pace of Louis Foster, for example, but we kind of all knew he'd be a contender heading into this season. Hence, he did exactly what we expected him to, giving this step up to AJ Foyt Racing with the team. And yeah, as you said, with all those testing, he's got a lot of experience with the team under his belt already, and he's going to go into 2026. And I think quite an interesting Rookie of the Year battle against Dennis Hauger. We might have more, but I think those two could be pretty close, seeing on how the various teams have performed over the course of the year. Obviously, Collett's got a year more oval experience than Hauger. I feel like he's looked maybe a bit more comfortable at times on ovals than Hauger, but obviously there's a long way to go. We've got a lot of things to see in regards to that. But there's 3 seats remaining now. A couple of question marks. We've got Dale Coyne Racing. Hauger's teammate is the one which Dale Coyne's been done by Halloween. Halloween's now gone, so the next target is Thanksgiving for him. This is a bit of a weird seat because we don't really have anybody at all like rumoured to the seat. You've got the Conor Daly might be in the mix. Linus Lundqvist could be in the mix. Roman Grosjean was suggested, but isn't really being talked about. So that's really interesting. We don't really have any insight into the Coyne one, unlike any of the other 2 seats potentially.
I think they were the 3 names that Marshall Pruitt reported, I think as recently as last week. So yeah, I don't know when it's going to be announced. It's probably going to end up being the new year, isn't it? Knowing how that goes, all the bullishness at the back end of the year, and definitely not been done by Halloween. I don't know what the stumbling block's been, whether another option's kind of arisen.
Well, yeah, one thing that's come up is the backing that Colt sort of came along with, and we said those came along with, hasn't been mentioned since. In Hauger's release, there was nothing about the sponsorship. I don't even know if Hauger was running it at some of the tests most recently. So that remains a bit of a question mark if Todd is actually coming as part of the team. And I guess that's quite a significant factor, because that's going to depend on if the second driver has to provide financial backing, which would really struggle for some people like Lundqvist or Daly who don't really have that backing, or if they're going to need a paid driver for that second seat. So that's going to be quite interesting to see what they do with that one.
It was weird at the time, the whole kind of alt nodes, was that what it was called, I think, when that was kind of all announced, because obviously it was announced, and I think it was intended at the time to coincide when it was announced in Nashville as kind of announcing VeeKay, and then obviously VeeKay never came back, and it all ended up being a bit weird, but there was never any real clarity, I felt, as to how kind of deep the investment was, whether it was going to fund both cars. Obviously now Andretti are basically kind of running Hauger in one of those cars. That's how it appears anyway, as much as Dennis was saying, yeah, I'm a Dale Coyne driver, and doing the very PR comments in our interview as you expect. But yeah, interesting point, Dan. I'm actually not sure.
One other one is RLL. Devin DiFrancesco was on a multi-year contract. It's one of those contracts which seems like the team can release him. And Mick Schumacher obviously tested for the team at Indianapolis fairly recently. He's actually announced to leave his Driving World Endurance Championship this week. So there's potentially looking at, even as soon as this week, Mick Schumacher could be announced to RLL. We haven't really had any updates since the test, but there hasn't been too many people other than Schumacher rumored with that seat, and concerning the announcement recently, I think there's a pretty good chance he's going to be in the seat pretty soon.
I think there was a report from the race actually within the last few days that they expect it to be announced very soon. So,
and then the final seat is Juncos Hollinger Racing. This one is really confusing because Juncos updated their website recently and put VeeKay as one of their confirmed drivers, but TBA is their other driver. Now, Stingray Rob was on a multi-year contract, and his team, his manager, and Rob himself keep on reaffirming that he's going to be at the team this season. But nobody else from Juncos has said he's going to be at the team. VeeKay didn't really commit to it. There was nothing in the press release when VeeKay signed about it. So there seems to be some sort of disparity in what Rob's team and what Juncos's team are saying in regards to who's going to be in that seat. So I feel like we'll have to wait maybe a little bit longer on that one because there seems to be some sort of contractual conflicts in the team, what's going on in regards to the second seat. So we'll have to kind of wait out to see what happens there.
I mean, there's so much uncertainty surrounding. Like, you'd expect if there was something set in stone with Rob, that the team would have just come out and said, yeah, he's our second driver for the year. But Peter Rossi, his manager, was quoted by Marshall Pruitt again in recent days saying that, yeah, he's back. And I think Pruitt said it could end up being nothing more than, I don't know what the saying is, storm in a teacup. Is that the saying? I think that was the wording that he used. So yeah, we'll see. But I think it is strange that, given all the speculation, if he was to return, that the team have not just come out and said, yeah, he's coming back. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see.
And as you said, Archie, IndyCar teams really focusing on Indy Next talent, such as AJ Foyt Racing, moving Caio Collet up from Indy Next to IndyCar. And Foyt have kind of only increased that Indy Next relationship in the last month or so since we last caught up, where they're one of two IndyCar teams who've announced they're going to expand into Indy Next in 2026. Now, to give you some backstory, they're going to be aligned with the HMD Motorsports. HMD Motorsports pretty much ran the entire grid for the last couple of seasons. They had 9 cars in 2025. They had 10 cars in 2024. But they're required to drop their number of entries down from 9 or 10 all the way down to 4. And because they kind of have the resources to run more cars, they're going to be sharing some technical alliances. They're going to be sharing one with a new team called Cusick Morgan Motorsports, which of course, Don Cusick and his Indy 500 efforts with Dry and Weinberg Racing. He's expanding into Indy Next. And then we've also got AJ Foyt Racing as the other team that HMD are partnering with. So they're going to enter 2 cars into the series next year. They've had both their drivers confirmed in Nicholas Montiero and Alessandro Di Taglio. And they're going to race for the team in 2026. And obviously great to see IndyCar teams expanding into Indy Next. We've obviously had Andretti there for a very, very long time. Juncos are returning after a year out. Chip Ganassi Racing obviously joined the series last year, and we've got one other team that I'll mention in a minute. But really, really good to see Foyt expanding their presence in the series by moving into Indy Next as well.
I think this just speaks to the fact that Indy Next is in pretty exceptional health, to be honest. There's more and more bigger names coming over. Enzo Fittipaldi has been signed for HMD Motorsports. Victor Martins has tested a couple of times. He's obviously got pedigree in F2 as well. The pair of them do, both race winners. And yeah, the new teams as well coming in. You've got this IndyCar interest. So yes, Ed Carpenter Racing are the other IndyCar team, along with AJ Foyt Racing, who are making the expansion down into Indy Next. They're partnering with Kate Motorsports, who have been partnered with Andretti for the last couple of seasons. So it's been kind of a 6-car Andretti stable, but ECR are taking that over. So again, more IndyCar interest there. And I think that's probably a legacy, really, of the fact that Fox are showing all of the races on television. And that was something that was not always the case with NBC. I think there's a lot more attention being given to Indy Next. And yeah, that was a great move. I think it's just being given a lot more, I guess, importance. A bit like the F1 feeder series. Look how popular F2 and F3 are for, again, ultimately junior level drivers. And they're being given in Indy Next exposure that they haven't necessarily had in the past. And it feels like IndyCar teams are possibly starting to almost follow that F1-like model of having, like, not explicitly academies, but it almost being that sort of thing by having a presence down in Indy Next. And yeah, I think teams are seeing an opportunity and seeing this chance to really breed talent and get kind of young drivers within their pipelines. And yes, Ganassi came back last year, as you mentioned, Dan. They've expanded to 4 cars this year, in addition to the introduction of Foyt and ECR. Andretti are obviously thriving. They've won the championship the last couple of years. And yeah, the field's going to sit at 24 cars. And not long ago, they were struggling to even reach 10. So it's been quite a turnaround in half a decade, really. It's been super impressive.
So Ed Carpenter's scheme is actually a bit different to Foyt's because they've also partnered with Jay Howard Driver Development in USF Pro 2000, the USF 2000 Championship. So what their goal is effectively they're going to bring people up the ladder straight from the first steps in USF 2000, which is basically base level single seaters, and they have an ECR associated team every step of the way up to IndyCar, which is quite interesting. So ECR already going above and beyond by partnering with other teams to create a pipeline for young drivers to go all the way to IndyCar. In Indy Next, by the way, they've confirmed one of their drivers in Nikita Johnson.
And they are running the same liveries as the IndyCar. I don't know whether they're going to change the livery for next year, but inserting the IMS test, they were running the exact same livery. And I'll be honest, it looked pretty cool. It fitted the cars very nicely.
So we have a lot of news for AJ Foyt Racing. We got an opportunity to speak to Larry Foyt, and I asked him about both his move into Indy Next for the team and Caio Collet signing. So his thoughts on that. And we had Santino Ferrucci in the call as well. So I asked him a little bit to reflect on this 2025 season after he said at the start of the year that he think they could fight for a championship. Didn't quite happen. So here's why he thought that didn't quite pan out. Cheers, Dave. Thanks, everybody, and well done on the announcement today. Just starting off with Larry, obviously the team expanded into Indy Next in the last couple of weeks, which was great to see. So why was that decision made to expand into Indy Next for 2026?
Well, I think it gives us the opportunity to do a lot of things. As you saw, our second car, we hired Caio from Indy Next, and it's really a great resource for us to keep an eye on the young drivers coming up through, young mechanics that we want to train that maybe we're looking at in the future for IndyCar, to keep that pipeline going with young mechanics and things of that nature. So for us, it was really a no-brainer and made a lot of sense. I think you're seeing a lot of the IndyCar teams are getting involved. You get a little bit extra testing. You get, it makes sense, and you can really have a pipeline to keep your program healthy. And that was the main reason we wanted to do it.
Obviously, you said you've got Caio in the other car for next year. Obviously, David's move to Team Penske seems quite inevitable. So when was that decision made to move Caio into the second car, and why did you decide to move him up into that entry?
Yeah, well, we were impressed with what he did in Indy Next with HMB, finished second in the championship. I think he won 3 races, and it was great that we had a great year as a team. There was a lot of interest from a bunch of drivers, but getting to meet Caio, and then also met the sponsor Combatrons, and as we started talking about things, and then we did a rookie test with him, and he was really impressive. And that really made us decide that was the way we wanted to go there. So we put it together after that.
Great. And for Santino, obviously heading into the year, you were quite confident in the fact the team could challenge for a championship, but obviously it didn't quite work out like that. So why do you think that happened? Why didn't you think you could have been as competitive as you could have been? And then now I've got the expectation to win 16 races next season. How are you going to pull that off from the lessons learned this year?
Yeah, part of the learning curve this coming season, we had a slight difference in dampers and book build from Penske. So the Alliance, it's really, really good for us. But all of my references and everything that we'd built with Adam and James the previous year had shifted quite a bit. And we kind of struggled to figure out how to adjust to that shift accordingly. And it took us longer than we anticipated. But we did have some races where we were really quick and we nailed it. So, but having understand, what you're doing with the car, it's not always easy. And some of the reads that I was getting were a little bit skewed. And Dave and I both had different ways of being competitive. So, he struggled a lot less in qualifying than I did, but in the racing, it was, I was a lot happier with the cars at times. We were averaging 15 plus positions passing a race, which is not something we want to be doing. But I feel good about what, we've learned and how we've adjusted some cars. I'm excited to go to some new tracks this coming season, like Arlington and Phoenix. It's always a good challenge for drivers when no one else has raced there, or at least a very small part of the grid has. So, I feel good about a lot of things. And I feel really good coming back to Indy this year, just based off of, we struggled a lot this past 500 with some weird things going on. And, our car was just so competitive, and to be carrying that same philosophy into the 26 500, I feel like we're going to be a very strong team, and I think everything's going to hopefully go our way.
So Collet was the big signing the last couple of weeks, but we've also had another confirmation. This time it's for an Indy 500 only entry, and I'm sure, as you've all seen, Ryan Hunter-Reay will drive the 4th Aaron McLaren car in the 110th running of the Indianapolis 500. Now, McLaren's 4th entry or 3rd entry previously has always been one for superstars: Fernando Alonso, Juan Pablo Montoya, Tony Kanaan, Kyle Larson, and now Ryan Hunter-Reay. Obviously, Ryan Hunter-Reay, the 2014 Indianapolis 500 winner and IndyCar champion. Hunter-Reay's obviously been withdrawing Rival Racing since 2023. Obviously made the Fast 12 in 2024, which was surprising, and came into victory contention last year. And as you'll hear from a little bit later, was so close to winning the race. It was literally tiny amounts of fuel costing him from winning a second Indy 500. As I said, you'll hear from him a little bit later on that. So, I mean, somebody who can quite clearly run the race, as we saw from last year, and bringing that experience to Aaron McLaren. Obviously, I know likes of Pato Ward's got a lot of Indy 500s under his belt now, but Hunter-Reay really brings that experience, a 20-plus year veteran at the Speedway. He gets on very well with Tony Kanaan. They were teammates at Andretti all the way back in 2010, and one of the first things they joked about was Kanaan said to Hunter-Reay, "Could you ever imagine I'd be your boss?" Obviously, Kanaan, the team principal at Aaron McLaren. So the other thing, which would happen a while ago, actually, was McLaren were touting they'd have like a superstar driver in that fourth car, one that would like erupt motorsport. That's been since confirmed to be Valentino Rossi through Jenna Fryer. So that would have been quite the story. We're reflecting it too much because it's not happening. I'm not quite sure how that would have panned out, considering Rossi's never driven a single-seater competitively, but I like the ambition from McLaren there. But yeah, Hunter-Reay obviously going to be in that car. He seems still really hungry to compete Indy 500. And one thing that was really interesting is it's kind of being touted Hunter-Reay is going to be in a multi-year deal, depending on how he feels at the conclusion of next year's Indy 500. So we could see Hunter-Reay even in 2027 as well, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this. This really gives him a genuine shot at winning this race because, I mean, he had a shot at winning it last year, but that came from nowhere, really, obviously in a backup car as well. And it was heartbreak losing out by such a fine margin. And you know, he was going to come out after that final stop. They didn't have to have stopped that lap later. They could have stopped the lap before and he still would have led the race and have been in a better situation than everyone else. And crushing. But interestingly, this move, Kanaan said, was kind of all born out of the disappointment of 2025. I think it was the morning after race day at Indy. He was with Dario Franchitti and they both kind of went up to Hunter-Reay as he was packing up and had a conversation. Obviously, Hunter-Reay was devastated by the events. But when Kanaan needed someone and McLaren needed someone to fill that void of the fourth car for this year, Kanaan had basically kept that conversation in mind and had kept Hunter-Reay in mind. And yeah, ultimately fits that superstar bracket that you mentioned, Dan. Obviously, Larson last year, Kanaan, Montoya, it was Alonso before that. It's been a crazy mix of drivers, and Hunter-Reay is in perfect company there. He fits right in. And yeah, they only want to run that extra car if they're going to have a genuine shot. And Hunter-Reay certainly gives that. And he proved this year that he still has the speed, even in a situation where maybe he definitely wouldn't be expected to win the race. He can still get himself into that position, and it's still at a point where that sort of disappointment doesn't deflate him, doesn't deter him. Instead, it just serves completely as motivation. And I think he said as long as he kind of maintains that motivation and that fire does still burn bright, he's going to stay. He's going to stick around. And yeah, he does offer that leadership as well. That's the other kind of flip side as well of it, as well as him still being very quick, that he can kind of guide what is still a very young three-car lineup, as much as O'Ward's had a lot of success at Indy. And I think from Kanaan's perspective, it maybe takes a bit of the burden off him as well, because he's had a very fraught couple of Mays with Kyle Larson. But there's definitely a desire for Hunter-Reay to be embedded within the team from pretty early on next year, I think. So yeah, very significant coup for the team. Always strong at Indy. They've proven that. I mean, I think they've had a driver in the top three for the last 4 or 5 years, and they're a team that appear to be going from strength to strength elsewhere as well. So very, very intriguing prospect. I think this is a massive signing really for May.
Yeah, going to be very interesting. Hunter-Reay still quite clear on top of his game, and McLaren are a team who have been strong at Indy 500 every year, but are still to crack that victory. And I think that's becoming a little bit of a source of frustration. They're constantly competitive, but no championships, no Indy 500s. And those are obviously the two big things that you need to win as an IndyCar team, and they're all being dominated by Penske and Ganassi in recent seasons. So will Hunter-Reay be the one to put McLaren back on top of the Indy 500? We'll have to wait and see. But a really interesting signing, as you said. Someone who brings a lot of leadership and guidance to younger drivers like Siegel and even Lundqvist, who really hasn't had competitive machinery in the Indy 500. So a really interesting prospect there. And we'll see how he gets on. And he gets on very well with Tony Kanaan. I'm sure there'll be a bond there. And I think Kanaan's also going to be relieved, as you said. He doesn't have to worry about being backup in an emergency. He can sit tight and be the team principal for the entirety of the month of May. Now, on the back of this, we had the opportunity to speak to both Ryan Hunter-Reay and Tony Kanaan. So I asked Ryan about how did he come into contention last year for the Indy 500 victory, and he gave really good insight as to why that happened, about bouncing back from that close call and looking forward when he doesn't do a full season and he has to reflect on this for a year. And then we spoke to Kanaan on why he hired Hunter-Reay for the superstar driver that McLaren always strive for, and his reflections a year into the job of being team principal. So here's both of them when we spoke to them a couple of weeks ago.
I'm kind of intrigued what your story was like last year at the Indy 500, because it kind of felt like you suddenly appeared into winning contention after 160 laps. And I've spoken to a few people about this who can't give me more information. So how did you just end up in that winning position all of a sudden last year where you're suddenly in contention?
Well, it's a good question. That's the one thing about racing, that from the outside looking in as a spectator, it's very, very difficult sometimes to keep track of strategies, right? Different strategies, especially at the Indy 500 when you have early yellows, right? And another one kind of compounds onto that. At that point, you're going to have a split in the field. And you can see it happen at the beginning of the Indy 500. You have half the field pit or you have a quarter of the field pit. You have to pay attention at that point. Even the Fox booth missed it for a good portion of it. They were actually on Pelot at the time or something saying he was the effective leader, when in fact we were the effective leader. We were just on the other side of the racetrack. So when you have two different strategies, right, then you can at some point then you could stop and maybe fill a half tank of fuel because you stopped in the last one when others didn't, and then you can leapfrog a bunch of cars, and then you have to pass cars on track. Obviously, you have to have the speed on track in order to maintain that. I was running with a bunch of cars that had been running in the top 6, 7 all day, so yeah, I wouldn't say we just appeared there because it was more just that it wasn't monitored. It wasn't followed, I guess. If you looked at it based on when cars pit and where they came out, and you looked at a chart on that, you'll see that we didn't just appear. We were there. So yeah, just came up short on. It had to be not even an eighth of a mile on fuel, I think. So it was very, 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 very close. And unfortunately, after looking at it, we didn't even need to pit on that lap. We could have pit the one before and just been in the same fuel position. So hindsight's 2020. A lot of the time in racing, I say racing's pretty cruel, and so Indy can be as well. And that's what happened.
And look, when you get so agonisingly close, for the rest of the field, next week you go to Detroit, it's a new race, new mentality. But for yourself, you've almost had a year to sit on it because you don't have any other racing going on. That is your focus each year. So when you do have a close call and have sort of nothing else to think about, how does that mentality shape you? And how do you kind of go over that in your mind and sort of look forward rather than looking at the past?
Well, every driver has their different stories. I'm sure if just with Tony and myself, if we were to talk about the ones that were close or the ones that got away or the ones that we thought we would win, we could be here for about an hour telling you different stories through different years. One that comes to mind, 2016, absolutely should have won that race, got taken out in pit lane. That's Indy. Everything has to be perfect, everything. And it just fuels the fire more. You could either use it as it can either manifest itself into negative energy, or you can use it into a positive, redirect it into a positive direction, which I love doing.
But then I think we're lucky enough that when we feel this way, we turn around and look, there's a Borg Warner in the shelf that I guess it doesn't suck that much.
That helps too. Good point.
And for Tony, as you said a little bit earlier, this sort of extra McLaren entry is always focused on placing real drivers with real prestige in the motorsport world. So was Ryan somebody you went to straight away? Were you exploring other options, and now ultimately did you choose Ryan to take that seat up?
I mean, it started, obviously, you have to explore because I didn't even know if he was available. He was there at Dry Rainbow for a few years. So, yeah, we had a list, but to me, also Zach is a big part of this, right? And Zach is extremely hands-on. And the beauty between Zach and I, we're both racers. We both think the same way. When he asked my opinion, my number one name was him. But I said, but because the people that are available, I cannot say, well, I want, because the people are on the contract. So it was more people on the list. But I said, if I can get him, And typical Zach says, well, make it happen. Do you need my help? I'm like, no, boss, let me try to handle it. And hopefully, obviously it ended pretty well.
And it's been about a year, Tony, since you took in charge of the team. So I'd just be interested to get sort of your thoughts on how the last year has gone, the progress the team has made, and what you really need to do to sort of deaden that gap to Ganassi and Palou at the top of the IndyCar standings.
So I'm going to try to make a short answer. Otherwise, we're going to have a 3-hour press conference. But then, look, since day one, I told the guys here that I love to be here. I don't know everything. I don't need to know everything. My job will be to motivate these people. And the only way I'm going to motivate them is being here. I have 13, 14 hours a day days. I was fortunate enough in my career throughout my success. I had very loyal people that by default are really good in what they do. They know where I stand, the way I push. They know my obsession of winning, the mentality of McLaren, and what Zach's expecting from this entire organization. So we had a great year. Yes. We're going to ask Tony Kanaan, Palou had a great year. We didn't. We had an okay year, right? And nobody else did. So, and that's the standard. And that doesn't mean we didn't have a good year. Let's take the positive, and we need to move forward. I think my wife actually told me that yesterday. She says, you're not very good taking compliments, because this guy just sent me a text last night. And I was like, look at this. And she goes, you're not happy about it? I said, no, it's okay. So she goes, can you enjoy that? Because it's a guy that's been on the outside and came in and says, man, this is impressive. And I'm just here, right, embedded. So what's happening here, then I'm building something the way I know. I'm bringing people the way I know I trust to do everything we can to be able to make this team successful. If that's what's going to happen or not, we have to see. We're going to get judged by the results. I love pressure. I love to be put it on the spot. That was my entire life, so I'm not afraid of that. And we have an opportunity here with the people that we have now in Ryan joining. That for us, for me, as this organization, we can create the same type of history I did with Dan, Dario, Herta, and Andretti in a different way. This would be cool to look back and say, man, this was like, remember what we did. So to me, pressure's on. Pressure comes to me, and I give to everybody else too. So we all go for it.
One thing that was quite interesting that came out of that conference is that they were asked about the potential of Conor Zilic racing in the Indy 500. Now, Zilic, you didn't know, finished runner-up in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, and it's been announced to race with Trackhouse full-time in 2026. Now, Justin Marks, the owner of Team Trackhouse, loves these sort of big events. He obviously competed in the Daytona 24 Hours with that super team of Van Gisbergen, McLaughlin, Zilic, and Keating. And he has kind of long really said his interest in racing in the Indy 500, but wants to do it with the right person at the right time. Now, I feel like Shane Van Gisbergen should certainly be considered for that, and there's a lot of people, including myself, who'd love to see that. But I feel like Zilic is the one really being touted, given his reputation and the potential that he's showing at his young age. And Marks has kind of said he doesn't want to do it this year. He wants Zilic to have a year in Cup, wants him to do the Coke 600 without having to stress about the Indy 500. And then in the future, maybe as soon as 2027, Marks are suggesting that Zilic could be a possibility to race the Indy 500 in the Trackhouse associated entry. Now, Trackhouse do run Chevys in NASCAR, and obviously McLaren are a Chevy team. You've also got the likes of Carpenter. You've also got the likes of Foyt Penske. You probably think wouldn't accommodate such an alliance, for example. And there's obviously Prema, a few other teams, Hunkos, who use Chevrolet engines. But McLaren and I'd be the ones you'd really expect to accommodate this, given McLaren's sort of superstar fourth driver. Could Zilic fill that role in a couple of years' time, for example? And interestingly, Kanaan didn't really seem too keen on it.
I certainly think the kind of inference is that, well, Marks had maybe keen for this to be, as you say, Dan, a 2027 thing as early as that, I guess, depending on how Zilic's rookie season does go in Cup next year. But I mean, he's a young guy who has emerged as a prodigious talent very, very quickly, and he's shown himself to be particularly versatile as well. I think I remember first watching him in MX5 Cup, and then obviously he's had some success in sports cars, and and has very quickly had success in the NASCAR ranks as well. And I think very rightly after the Larson deal, there was kind of this assumption that, okay, if this is going to happen, then maybe it would be our McLaren who facilitated it. And what struck me in the media call the other week was just how stressed Kanaan had been by the Larson ordeal. I think it was kind of apparent already how, as I said a bit ago, how fraught an experience it had been for him, kind of having to be the guy orchestrating all of that. But I mean, he said that he'd never been more scared than before the Indy 500 this year. And he kind of mentioned when Kevin Blanche, the technical director, had basically mentioned to him about getting ready to get in the car, given the tense weather situation with Larson having to get away, and Kanaan was genuinely terrified about this because he wasn't prepared or anything. So yes, it's a big relief for him to have Hunter-Reay, as much as Hunter-Reay did joke that he had put together a secret double deal for next year. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting whether Aaron McLaren would kind of facilitate it again in the future. Like, I don't think it was a firm no, but at the same time, he was very keen to express the fact that Hunter-Reay is here for as long as Hunter-Reay wants to be with the team. And he said, like, it might come to the fact that there's a mutual agreement that they don't want to continue, but it does seem like it's a multi-year thing. That's the intention at this point, depending on how things end up panning out. And yeah, as you say, maybe there would be, I guess, the other teams pretty keen to partner with Trackhouse to run Zilich. I mean, it's going to get you a heck of a lot of exposure, especially if he tries to do the double as well. I mean, which he'll have to, given the whole waiver system, unless that changes. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe it wouldn't be so stressful for Kanaan in the future if he doesn't have that same maybe driving situation if the driver has to get out of the car. But it still just feels like it took a lot out of him, and that's why he kind of just doesn't quite want to entertain it at this stage. But yeah, I got the impression maybe he isn't keen, but I think he even points out the fact that it's not a definite no in the future. So we'll see.
It's one of those things where you need a Chevy team to accommodate it, but a lot of them you probably can't see accommodating it. And from a Trackhouse perspective, they don't really want to go with a Prema, for example, or a Prema qualified in pole, but Prema or Hunkos who don't really have experience to the same magnitude as a McLaren. Or I think Carpenter could be a good option, but as long as Ed's running there, would they put 4 in? Probably not. So McLaren is the most realistic one. So I still would love to see Van Gisbergen in at some point. I think that would be awesome. And obviously Larson said he kind of want to return after his Cup days, which would be interesting. And obviously, if you didn't catch it, Larson won the NASCAR Championship a couple of weeks ago in controversial fashion, being the playoff system. But I'm going to do my own perspective on should IndyCar implement a playoff system in a couple of weeks' time, in a very packed article. So stay tuned for it. I've done research about the last 6 years, gathered about 7 different quotes from drivers that you might have caught in recent podcast weeks to try and get you an interesting perspective on an IndyCar with a playoff system. So we'll see what happens with that. Obviously, there's been some suggestions. Santino Ferrucci said doesn't really know where they came from, but somewhere it's been brought up. But obviously, the Indy 500 grid is starting to fill up ahead of 2026. Now, Prema haven't really confirmed if they're coming back to IndyCar next year. Let's just presume that they are. Again, that seems to be up in the air because they lost one of their big backers heading into the year. But at the minute, the expectation is they're going to continue. So, usually 27 entries. We've obviously had Jack Harvey confirmed at Ryan Bold Racing as one of their drivers. The other one's still to be confirmed. If Conor Daly doesn't get a full-time seat, he raced there in, 22, 23, one of those years. I can't remember which one.
24, I think.
Was it 24? Wow.
Yeah, it was the year where he drove for everyone.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was 24. Wow. My
polka
years are really messed up. Anyway, Daly was then 24. I think it makes a lot of sense for him to come back being Indiana native, and I think it'd be a good competitive Indy 500 driver for the team. So he'd make a lot of sense there. He doesn't get a full-time seat. Hunter-Reay's obviously gone to McLaren, so that takes us to 30 entries. Cashin Evers is sort of unofficially confirmed he's coming back. Let's just say he is. That's 31. And then you've got Ed Carpenter, who hasn't confirmed his plans, but I feel like he'll give it another crack.
Yeah, he'll want people to know if he's retiring, I would imagine.
Yeah, so he's going to give it another crack. So that brings us up to 32. Now, RLL haven't confirmed, but Takuma Sato did test for them about a month ago at IMS to test new dampers and new brakes, I believe. So I feel like they wouldn't put him in the car if they didn't have at least some intention of running him again. Again, that's not confirmed, but Sato is definitely still in the mix. He said he'd still be interested in running the race. The likes of Catherine Legg are still interested in running the Indy 500. Could Jacob Abel run with Abel Motorsports if he doesn't get a full-time seat in 2026? That is also a possibility. But one driver we know won't be returning in 2026 is Marco Andretti, because he announced in the last couple of weeks that he's retiring from motorsport full-time. And you kind of got the sense over the last couple of years, Marco was getting increasingly frustrated at the 500. I don't think he's had a top 10 since 2017. This year, he obviously had to go through bump day, and he just didn't really have the pace. Has been a theme for the last couple of years. His Indy 500 lasted all of one corner in 2025. And so I feel like the last couple of years have been a bit frustrating for Marco, and just wants to hang up his helmet, focus a little bit on family life. And I think the first Indy 500s since 2001 without an Andretti, so quite incredible, really. But after a 20-odd year IndyCar career, Marco Andretti is calling it a day. Obviously retired full-time in 2020, but this marks completely all of racing, including the Indy 500, one-off he was doing every year with the team that bears his father's name.
It feels like it's been coming, this. I mean, I think it's a real shame that he couldn't have bowed out on two better outcomes, obviously. Two very similar crashes the last couple of years. I mean, it's obviously, especially this year, like, he barely ran the race. He ran a corner, didn't he? So I think it would have been good or nice if he went into an Indy 500 knowing it was his last one, so he could be properly celebrated. I mean, he said as recently as this May that he would keep doing it as long as he was kind of enjoying it, as long as he was competitive. So it didn't sound like this May it was necessarily something that he kind of made his mind up on or anything. I just maybe think that that kind of enjoyment ran out a bit with the stresses of this year, obviously having to come back for bump day. He's not young anymore. As you say, Danny, he's got a family and ultimately leaves behind a strong legacy. Like he had an kind of, until, as you say, kind of waned a bit in the latter years, a pretty consistent record at Indy. I think he said, I've not got the results in front of me, but I think he said in his statement, 20% of races he was in the top three. It was a shame that, I guess, maybe his biggest moment, the pole in 2020, came with no fans there. But that was obviously a huge moment and a pretty iconic moment in the month of August. But yeah, real longevity. I mean, I think he made 20 starts, which put him, I think he said 12th all time. And that is not all down to the fact that he was an Andretti. I think he's really honoured the family name pretty well, given it's hard enough as a second generation driver, let alone a third generation driver coming after two absolute icons. So yeah, credit to Marco. Leaves a possible vacancy at Andretti if they do want to run a fourth car. Like, does Herta have interest in running it? I know it could be pretty tricky, really. Depends what his commitments are with Cadillac, but he is running Daytona 24 Hours, I know, with Cadillac. So that is something to ponder. Like, does Herta have an interest? I don't know. I know obviously there's a bit of a weird situation there because Andretti are a Honda team and obviously Cadillac in the General Motors, Chevrolet family. So yeah, we'll see what happens there. But I just thought that was like, I had it in my head that Herta probably wouldn't do it, but the fact that he's been announced for, in fact, is it an entire endurance schedule in IMSA?
Yes, he's doing Daytona, Sebring, and Road Atlanta. Yeah,
so that's kind of made me think, okay, maybe he is wanting to race more than F2. I don't know. I just feel like he'd be quite a lot. But
to make clear, Herta has no races for the entirety of May, so he could theoretically slot into an Indy 500 month uninterrupted, but obviously that depends on what they decide to do. But I mean, Marco, just to end up on him, didn't break the family curse, which has been going on since the 60s. Obviously, will probably be most remembered for how close he came in 2006, being overtaken right at the end on his Indy 500 debut. So, yeah, kind of like a disappointing bow out to Marco Andretti's, and I guess the Andretti family name racing in the Indy 500 obviously will carry on in the team's name, but just been a frustrating couple of years. And I don't want to say it felt like a wasted ride in the last couple of seasons, but it felt Andretti didn't seem particularly competitive, especially compared to his teammates, and something wasn't quite clicking. And he wants to focus on his family. And best of luck with him to that. We'll see if Mura becomes a professional IndyCar driver in 25 years' time, whatever. But yeah, as you say, it's going to be interesting who, or even if Andretti decide to play somebody in a fourth entry, will they run that car? Will they just want to focus on three? Again, Herta remains a bit of a question mark, as you say. But otherwise, there's nobody you'd really associate with putting into that entry. So
I wouldn't be shocked if they wanted to run three, like, unless it's a really, really good option. Like, it's not been, as we've said, been particularly competitive in the hands of Marco. So maybe they would want to just focus all their resources on the three entries. I think that would make sense. But yeah, we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, so the field is coming up, as we said. Let's presume Passion Evans and Carpenter are returning for the time being. We've got 32 entries. Question marks in RLL. Question mark on if Abe will run an entry. So according to Marshall Pruitt, some of the names that he still thinks are in contention: Conor Daly, obviously, as we said. Stefan Wilson is looking for an opportunity. Charlie Kimball is looking for an opportunity. James Rowe might be looking for something, and Sebastian Saavedra wants to come back as well as Catherine Legg. So a few really left field names in there, but obviously everyone wants to do an Indy 500. So a couple of interesting names in the bag there. So yeah, we just have to wait and see what comes out of that. What's the next topic? I've lost.
Kirkwood.
Okay, cool. So we've got a few other things to run through, including 2 multi-year extensions. We're going to start off with Kyle Kirkwood, who signed a multi-year extension with Andretti Global. Obviously, heading into the end of 2026, he was expected to be one of the big free agents in the driving market, but he's reaffirmed his commitment to Andretti, and he is now seen as kind of the future of the team, I think, really, with Herta's departure. Herta was always the golden child, but Kirkwood's had a good couple of seasons where he's really challenged Herta, and we really saw a breakout year for Kyle Kirkwood, take 3 victories, including on and over, on his way to finishing 4th in the championship. So overall, a very good year for Kirkwood, and he really seems like the one that's going to lead the team forward in the future. Obviously, Power joins the team this off-season, but he's not really a long-term option with his age. And Marcus Ericsson kind of seems like he's not going to be there much longer based on their interest in Hauger and trying to keeping that alliance open with Dale Coyne Racing. So Kirkwood really is going to be a centerpiece of the team for years to come. And I think it's completely the correct option for Andretti and completely correct option for Kirkwood. I mean, he's found a really great home there. He's really thriving in that environment, and he's going to be the person who's going to be the team leader, and the one they probably see is the most likely to win the championship. His progress year on year has been pretty consistent, and heading into 2026, he could be one who's quite well a title favourite. Not a favourite, Pillow's obviously the favourite, but one of the contenders to somehow beat Pillow across the course of 17 races. So it really interesting signing there, and I think one that just makes a lot of sense really for everybody involved. Andretti having that star driver locked in, and Kirkwood having a home and not having to worry about trying to find a seat throughout the course of 2026.
Pretty significant development for Andretti, given the driver market is expected to be pretty active next. Well, I guess it kicks off in a few months into the season, really, but it's going to be pretty active next year by all accounts. And I think it's pretty unquestionable that Kirkwood would have been sought after by any top team with an opening, and I guess it speaks to his loyalty to the team that has essentially orchestrated his development, that he has agreed to stay on board. I think it shows faith in the direction that Andretti are heading in, and yeah, as you say, Danny, he will be the lead guy in the long term with this new deal with her longer there. And yeah, I think last year was good. Last year was really good. Obviously, I know they had a bit of a tail off, but for a large portion of the season, especially that early part, he was the guy other than Pillow. Obviously, those first 9 races, they were the only couple of drivers that had victories, and I think it showed a lot of potential on the 27 cars side. And I guess bearing that in mind and bearing the relationship and the stability that they've got, why change? Like, why go and pursue something else when they clearly have something pretty good going on there? I don't think you want to interrupt what has been a constant trajectory of year-to-year progress in the championship while he's been at Andretti, 11th to 7th to now 4th in the championship. And he strikes me as a pretty uncomplicated guy, and I think he wouldn't want next season to be like what Will Power had all of last season, or David Malukas had all of last season, with just constant questions about his future. And I just don't think that sort of distraction is particularly helpful. So, yeah, I think it's a move that says a lot about Kyle Kirkwood. He's a humble guy and committed to his roots, and I think this is a collaboration that would have been completely stupid, really, if they didn't continue with it.
The other person we saw sign a long-term contract is our good friend Louis Foster, who was already under a multi-year deal, which would take him through to the end of 2026, but he's added multi-years onto that multi-year deal, so he's now going to be there, we expect, at the end of 2028. So another 3 full seasons expected for him at RLL, and I feel like it's a very similar case to Kirkwood. RLL haven't really had a driver to build their team around. They obviously see a lot of promise in Foster based on year one. Rahal's obviously still around, but you don't know how long he is going to stay around for. And their other entry, they've been chopping and changing drivers for years and years to come. If Mick Schumacher comes in, that story might well change. But one, good to see that our third podcast host will be on plenty more episodes for the next 3 years. So that's that covered for us. Thank goodness for that. But yeah, obviously, other news is I know Foster didn't have a superb year on all accounts, especially on the stats sheets where no top 10s and 23rd in the standings, but I think there was a lot of potential, untapped potential. RLL obviously aren't as strong as maybe they expected to be. And as we're going to later, there's a lot of big changes going on in the team as well, which I think is creating a really exciting timeline for them. And I think to have somebody maybe to build your team around a little bit more is really important for them. And I think we've seen what Foster can do in Indy next. And I think he's definitely capable of that in IndyCar with more experience. And I think we're going to really see hopefully a jump from him heading into year 2.
Yeah, it's an intriguing piece of news. I'm not sure it was something I necessarily expected to see at this point, but at the same time, it does make a lot of sense, as you kind of mentioned, very much like Kirkwood's, just making sure he has that security into the long term. Obviously, I would say it was a promising rookie season, obviously flashes of real pace at points, and I think a lot of the struggles were down to wider team issues, really, particularly on race day. Again, maybe some flaws on ovals and a lot of things that they do need to kind of rectify there. I would say they were still in a bit of limbo, but I think to be kind of moving away from RLL, you'd be banking on having an exceptional sophomore year, really, given the amount of drivers who are probably going to be free agents at the end of this year. And it just makes a ton of sense to recommit. I think for RLL, as you say, having that sort of security and a guy that can be the figurehead of the team, I guess in a way like Lundgaard was, and then on that, I guess Foster's side as well, he gets he's clearly believes in, he said this when we had him on the pod the other week, that the trajectory that they are on under the guise of Jay Fry, who, let's be frank, couldn't really kind of put his fingerprints that much on the team during the season because he joined at the start of April. So this off season was going to be a time of really kind of making an impact in these 6 months without racing. And okay, over the last few years, this is a team that's had quite a lot of false dawns, I would say, but I feel like under Fry's leadership, they are genuinely in a pretty good position, and we are seeing some properly high quality experienced personnel coming on board. I mean, they've prized Brian Barnhart away from Aaron McLaren. He's super experienced and well regarded. They've also got Gavin Ward on board now in the leadership department. Obviously most recently Aaron McLaren before he was replaced as team principal by Tony Kanaan. He's been at Penske as well. So they've got an abundance of ridiculously highly talented people in that leadership team now. And it feels like they're suddenly building a core that they didn't have in the past. So with all of that in mind, it makes perfect sense that someone as talented as Foster would kind of believe in this project and not want to risk losing this opportunity.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And moving on to that team side, some huge signings like Gavin Ward, who's saying Brian Barnhart, who reunited a year after they were both at Aaron McLaren. I mean, it's kind of weird because Ward doesn't really have a specified role. He's just sort of there as an advisor to help out the team. And Brian Barnhart's got a ridiculously complicated role. It's like Senior Vice President of Operations or something really amusing like that. They also signed Kyle Sagan from Aaron McLaren as well as their pit stop manager going forward, which is a really interesting role. You're a pit stop manager as a senior role in the team, but a lot of really experienced leadership. And we hear from Graham every off-season about how they change every single team personnel and engineering reshuffle, but it feels like they've actually got a bit of direction now with their new leadership team. And you feel like with Mick Schumacher in a third car, they should really have 3 drivers who are sort of operating at a similar level. And you don't really have somebody kind of struggling in the third entry. Obviously, it's a Pietro Schumacher comes in like you have in the last couple of years. So a couple of really big signings there. And I mean, just expanding on team personnel side, we saw Aaron McLaren kind of make a little bit of a replacement. So Olivier Boisson, who was at Andretti last couple of years, and obviously Dale Coyne Racing before that. And the other big leadership changes were actually at Penske. Obviously, during the Indy 500 debacle, they lost a lot of their key personnel when Carl Moyer, who's also obviously gone to McLaren, Tim Cindric and Ron Rzuski were all removed from their roles. They're kind of still dealing with the fallout from that. So Jonathan Duguid kind of took the team principal role. We knew that a long time ago, and alongside Travis Law was the competition director. David Faustino, who was on Will Power Stand, has now been appointed as technical director, whilst Ben Bretzman, who was Scott McLaughlin's engineer, has now moved on to the engineering manager of competition. They've also signed, they've also promoted, I should say, three other people, so Matt Johnson, Robbie Atkinson, and Andrew Miller. So the work that was done between Cindric, Brzezinski, and Moyer will be done between all of them, as well as Duguid and Law. So the work between them is being spread across 7 people as opposed to the 3 that was previously. And who will be on each engineering stand will be announced at a later date. But some leadership changes at Penske in reaction to the removals they had all the way back in May. So just fixing the blood and the scars from that.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to think that, I mean, I know they had a somewhat errant start to the season anyway last year. And I know a lot of it was down to misfortune, but at the same time, there were some performance shortcomings. And you've got to think some of that was down to it just being a bit unsettled. There were a lot of people kind of in interim roles post-May, obviously the bulk of the season coming after the 500. So, yeah, a bit of a fresh start, reset for Penske after those drastic measures taken by Roger Penske. I think the thing that stands out most to me is the fact that Ben Bretzman's leaving McLaughlin's timing stand. They're obviously very good friends outside of their working relationship as well. So, I mean, I don't want to say it's a loss for McLaughlin because Bretzman's still going to be within the team, but I think him not having Ben Bretzman on the timing stand will probably be a bit strange. So yeah, intrigued to see how that all pans out. But just a restoration of some stability at Penske, which they really lost, obviously.
And that's the main bit of news from the last couple of weeks. There are some smaller stories that I will just sort of round up for you because we usually put them in off-season, but because we didn't want this episode to be 5 hours long, we won't really discuss them in great detail. There has been some testing going on. So we had cars on track at... We did cover the Indianapolis test because that was the end of the Locker Hughes episode. But we've since had Collet and Hauger complete their sort of rookie oval test at Nashville, which is a requirement to race on ovals and obviously do Indy 500 ROP in April next year. We also had an Indy 500 test. Palou and O'Ward as the top 2 in the standings were testing Firestone tyres ahead of next year's race. And we had, as I said earlier, Sato was testing alongside Alexander Rossi, new dampers and new brakes. Something really interesting that Louis Foster told us was how he had to sort of pump the brake into turn 4. To not let the pedal fall flat to the floor when you come to pit entry. Sato, I believe, said that one of the things they tried meant you didn't have to pump the brake anymore and you could brake normally, which will reduce the risk of accidents in pit lane. So encouraging signs there. Rossi was on track with Scott Dixon at Phoenix. Obviously, Phoenix comes back next year in May to the IndyCar calendar for the first time since 2018. The track's changed quite a lot since then. They've actually flipped where turn 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 are. The start-finish line has changed. They've obviously got the dog leg. We don't expect the IndyCars to use that because they ride so much lower than the NASCARs. But a little bit of testing going on there to try and find the right tyre compound. So IndyCars were back on track at Phoenix. We obviously saw Indy next as well at Barber and Indianapolis. As you said earlier, the big name really there was Victor Martin, who was at HMD for Indianapolis test, but then moved to Juncos for the Barber test, which was rather interesting. Just some other little bits of news. We saw Alex Palou on the Borg Warner this week, which was really fascinating to see. One thing I did learn is there are 113 names, no, 113 faces for 109. No, it's 112 faces for 109 Indy 500s. Did you know
that? I knew there were some, obviously, with 2 for certain years because of the relief drivers. Yes.
Yes, so there's two relief drivers, and there's one other person, a man named Tony Holman, who brought the Indy 500 back after World War II as president of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. So his race is also in the Borg-Warner, which I didn't know prior to this week, so that's pretty interesting. So Palou was fine in the Borg-Warner 6 months after winning the Indianapolis 500. I know you mentioned Herta earlier doing Daytona. We've seen some more drivers, so we've got Palou and Dixon, who are going to be with Meyer Shank as they were last year, but they're going to do Daytona, Sebring, and Road Atlanta. So same as her. So they're going to be doing basically the big races schedule. And it's going to be quite busy with drivers because they're going to have St. Pete, Phoenix, Arlington, Sebring, and Barber all in consecutive weeks. So it's not quite the old slow tough start to the season like we used to have, is it? with that much going on. We've also had Christian Rasmussen announced for AO Racing at Daytona, and the Fittipaldi brothers, Pietro and Enzo, will be racing in the same entry for the first time, which is pretty cool. And Enzo, as you said earlier, announced for HMD in the last couple of weeks, alongside Jack Beaton, who comes from the European ladder. And as I always do, ex-IndyCar driver watch, Hunter-Reay and your Manchester fellow Ben Hanley going to be racing for United Autosports. Romain Grosjean's going to be in a Mustang for Daytona as well. Now, I had a postseason test, which was actually quite interesting because both McLaughlin and Newgarden were testing for Porsche Penske next year, ahead of next year. So they could be two we see at Daytona. Louis Foster, a good mate, was out as well for Tower Motorsports and LMP2. Nolan Siegel was with Inter Europol. Carl Kirkwood, as he always does with Vasta Solomon. Will Power was out there, so Will Power doesn't usually do Daytona, so that's pretty cool to see. Callum Ilott was also on track, as well as on ex-IndyCar Driver Watch, Kevin Magnussen, Toby Sari, Tristan Vautier, Frank Pereira, Yuri Vips of all people, and Sebastian Bourdais. So some interesting names in there.
Power ran the Indy 8 Hours. I think that might have been back end of September. So that was, correct. I think that was his sports car debut, or at least the first time in a long time.
And he's with the same team as well. I think it's called the Express 75. So he's going to be with the same team if he just do Daytona. That's not confirmed. But Colton Herta was announced for Formula 2 with Hitech, which I don't think we actually covered. But anyway, that's been confirmed. Colton Herta is officially a Formula 2. He's going to race with Hitech. Pato Ward in FP1 in Mexico City, which is always cool to big Mexican support, as always. McLaren's still have an FP1 session to fill. So Ward could actually be in line to do another one in Abu Dhabi, which would be particularly interesting. But anyway, that's it. But I know we said we do this every week, but we've had so many interviews we haven't got a chance. But if you remember at the end of the Lockie Hughes episode when we did our last news recap, we said we do IndyCar Connections each week. So we're going to do another one this week, and I'll give you the answer to the last one. So Archie did it. I actually found like an online site where you can create your own, which made it a lot easier, which is cool. So we had Mexican IndyCar drivers and Adrian Fernandez, Alfonso Celis Jr., Esteban Gutierrez, and Pato Ward. Debuted in 2021 in Callum Ilott, Cody Ware, Jimmy Johnson, and Romain Grosjean. Sons of IndyCar drivers and Alonso Jr., Colton Herta, Graham Rahal, and Marco Andretti. And then this one really annoyed me because it was supposed to be driven for Chip Ganassi and Andretti, but ended up being Indy 500 winners, which made it way easier than it should have been. Anyways, Dario Franchitti, Marcus Ericsson, Takuma Sato, and Tony Kanaan. Your 16 drivers for this week. I will try and put a link into the actual one you can do online, but I'll read that out to you anyway, just in case you want to really test yourself. So this week 16 are Nolan Siegel, Rinus VeeKay, Michael Andretti, Fernando Alonso, Josef Newgarden, Marcus Armstrong, Marcus Ericsson, Stefan Wilson, Callum Ilott, Linus Lundqvist, Tom Blomqvist, Santino Ferrucci, Felix Rosenqvist, Conor Daly, Kyle Larson, and Pietro Fitipaldi are your 16 for this week. So once again, when it's the two of us next, we will update you with that 16. See if you can do it without doing it online, and then do it online if you wish to afterwards, and see what you scored. But I've quite like the categories this week, so should be good fun. But anyway, I think that's all. You've had a very condensed roundup, about a month's worth of news. And as we said, if you haven't already, listened to all the interviews. All our guests are superb and give really, really good insights. There's some really funny stories in there as well. So make sure you do give them a listen. Next week, we don't really know what's on because it's off-season. Maybe we'll have another interview, maybe we won't. As I said right at the start, we will have a midweek episode with an Indy Next driver. So stay tuned for that as a little bit of a bonus on next week's episode. But otherwise, I don't think there's much to say. Thanks for putting up with us too. Hopefully we're good enough. Hopefully you don't have to rely on a guest to listen to us. because I think this momentum will stop soon as we get to Christmas and have to start planning the Christmas special. Archie, what are we going to do?
Yeah, I'm buzzing for that. That was good to be back as a duo. It's been a while.
It has been a while. Yeah, we kind of go through phases of interviews on this podcast. We have like loads, and then we just have a dry spell, and then we have loads on a dry spell. We'll try and keep it consistent this off season. What's the counter? What's the counter? We haven't had a chance to do this in a while, so
we are now below 100 days. 100 days below 100 days until race day, even, but below 100 days until we get on track at St. Pete. As we record on Sunday, 96 days. But once this episode drops on Tuesday, it will be 94 days until opening practice in St. Pete. We're getting towards halfway. Like we're nearly 3 months removed from the season and 3 months to go.
Wow.
So, exciting.
Whoa! That's crazy. That is crazy. Off season has sped by. That's something I never thought I'd say.
When we have content to bring you and we aren't scraping the barrel, it's great. It flies by.
We are getting to the most difficult time. IndyCar Weekly might be a little bit sparse if you are reading it in the next couple of weeks, but I'll try. So I'll have a playoff piece, maybe coming this week. I've been saying that for the last 3 weeks, but it'll be good once it's out. Anything you want to promote this week? Anything you expect, or you got a quiet one?
I'll be writing up the Hauger interview at some point, so listen to that, or no.
Release it as an audio book.
No, I'll be writing up the Hauger interview, so keep an eye out for that on Tuesday or Wednesday, probably. And then our interview with an unnamed Indy Next driver. We've been very cryptic for some reason.
We need to give some anticipation to this.
Yep. I will also write that up for either the end of this week or the start of the week after, whenever I get the time.
And what I will say is, if you do want to listen to an actual DIVEBOMB podcast which has racing going on, we do have a Formula 1 podcast which was recently relaunched. If you did want to listen to that, we also have Formula E podcast. We also have a NASCAR podcast, which I believe is still going. We have an endurance podcast for any endurance fans out there. So yeah, listen to them if you want some motorsport which is actually going on, and maybe see if they're scraping the barrel as much as we are. There's another competition going on. But we won't stop releasing weekly episodes. To be fair, at the minute we're basically bi-weekly with the amount of
that's impressive
episodes we've got going out, with the amount of bonuses we have. So as I said, hopefully you enjoy it all, and we're going to carry on marching all the way into St. Petersburg. But for this time, thanks very much for watching, thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.